a man spots a baby elephant wandering alone, lost and helpless. At first, he fears the worst. But moments later, a distant rumble grows louder, and the herd arrives, doing something so incredible, so unthinkable, it defies everything we know about these majestic creatures. What drove them to this extraordinary act? And how does one small moment with the herd change everything for this man? Don't miss this heart-stopping story of survival, connection, and the power of nature's greatest bonds. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Martha's fingers traced the worn leather binding of Robert's journal as she sat in the bustling airport terminal. The boarding pass in her other hand was already creased from her constant checking, its edges softening like well-loved paper. Gate 27B to Nairobi. Her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and fear, a sensation that had been building since she'd left her empty house that morning. Final boarding call for Flight 206 to Nairobi. The announcement echoed through the terminal, making her jump slightly. Martha gathered her carry-on bag, clutching the journal closer to her chest like a shield. This was Robert's dream, not hers. Yet here she was, a widow of 8 months, about to embark on an African safari alone. The thought made her chest tighten, her breath catching in her throat. On the plane, she settled into her window seat, immediately opening Robert's journal to avoid conversation. The familiar scent of old paper and leather brought comfort, but the elderly woman next to her had other ideas. "First time to Africa?" the woman asked, her silver hair neatly styled, her smile warm and inviting. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Yes," Martha replied softly, managing a polite smile, before turning back to the journal, her shoulders tensing slightly. "I'm Margaret Davenport," the woman continued, smoothing her floral blouse, "visiting my son in Kenya." Martha nodded, murmuring her name in response, then pretended to be absorbed in reading. Her fingers nervously played with the journal's corner. She couldn't bear the thought of explaining why she was traveling alone. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Martha finally allowed herself to really look at Robert's careful handwriting. The pages were filled with sketches of elephants, detailed notes about their behaviors, and little observations that made her smile despite her tears. His precise penmanship brought back memories of watching him write at their kitchen table. "Elephants mourn their dead," one note read. "They return to the bones of their loved ones year after year. Remarkable creatures." The words seemed to take on new meaning now. Her finger traced underneath another line. "Someday, we'll see them together, Martha." A drop of moisture threatened to fall on the page, and she quickly wiped her eyes. The memory of that conversation flooded back. They'd been sitting in their favorite breakfast nook, planning their retirement adventures. Sunlight had streamed through the window, casting a golden glow on Robert's face as his eyes had sparkled while he described the African plains, the majestic elephants, the golden sunsets. "Just wait," he'd said, reaching for her hand across the worn oak table. "It'll change our lives." But now she was here alone, and the ache in her chest felt heavier than ever, a constant companion she couldn't shake. The lodge, when she finally arrived, was beautiful in a way that made her loneliness sharper. Warm woods, thatched roofs, and everywhere, windows showcasing the endless savanna beyond. The late afternoon sun painted everything in honey-colored light. The staff welcomed her with genuine warmth, but their friendly chatter washed over her like distant waves, barely penetrating her bubble of solitude. Her room was spacious, with a private veranda overlooking the plains. As evening settled, Martha sat in one of the comfortable chairs, Robert's journal open in her lap. The African night was alive with unfamiliar sounds, crickets, distant animal calls, the rustle of wind through acacia trees. The air was different here, rich with unfamiliar scents and the promise of adventure. A note fell from between the pages, slightly yellowed at the edges. "Our first safari will be life-changing, my love." Tears splashed onto the paper as Martha whispered into the gathering darkness, her voice trembling. "I hope you're right, Robert." She closed the journal, holding it against her heart as she made her silent promise to join tomorrow's safari, no matter how much her nerves protested. The stars began appearing overhead, brighter and more numerous than she'd ever seen them back home. The African sun peeked over the horizon as Martha made her way to the waiting safari vehicle. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the metal rail, climbing into the back row of the open-air Jeep. Robert's camera hung heavy around her neck, a constant reminder of why she was here, halfway across the world from everything familiar. "Good morning, everyone," the guide's cheerful voice cut through the morning air. "I'm David, and I'll be showing you the wonders of our wildlife today." His warm smile and confident demeanor put the other tourists at ease, their excited chatter filling the cool morning air. The scent of fresh coffee from their travel mugs mingled with the earthy smell of the African bush. Martha watched as a young couple in matching khaki outfits snapped selfies, their laughter echoing in the crisp morning. An energetic family of 4 pointed at birds swooping overhead, the parents patiently answering their children's endless questions. She pulled Robert's journal closer, feeling like an outsider among their joy, wishing she could share their enthusiasm. The Jeep rumbled to life, and David's voice carried over the engine. "Remember, stay seated at all times. No sudden movements when we spot animals. They're wild creatures, and we respect their space." He adjusted his binoculars, scanning the horizon with practiced ease. After 30 minutes of driving through the sprawling savanna, David raised his hand, and the vehicle slowed to a quiet crawl. "Look there," he whispered, pointing toward a watering hole. Martha's breath caught in her throat, her fingers instinctively tightening around the journal. A herd of elephants moved with surprising grace, their great bodies reflected in the still water. The morning light cast long shadows behind them, making them appear even more majestic. Dewdrops sparkled on the surrounding grass like scattered diamonds. "See the largest female?" David spoke softly, his voice filled with reverence. "That's the matriarch. She leads the herd, making all the important decisions." Martha watched as the elderly elephant guided her family with gentle nudges and subtle movements, her weathered skin telling stories of years spent protecting her herd. Cameras clicked rapidly around her. The young couple whispered excitedly, nudging each other and comparing photos, while the children bounced in their seats, barely containing their enthusiasm. But Martha sat still, her hands resting on Robert's journal, its worn leather smooth beneath her fingers. She could almost hear his voice, imagining how he would have described this moment, the way the babies stayed close to their mothers, how the adults communicated with gentle trunk touches, the complex social dynamics playing out before them. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she finally lifted Robert's camera. Through the viewfinder, the elephants seemed both closer and further away, just like her memories of Robert. She took a few pictures, but each click felt hollow without him beside her, sharing his enthusiasm and knowledge, pointing out details she might have missed. The Jeep continued its journey, passing graceful giraffes stretching their long necks toward acacia trees and elegant antelopes bounding across the plains. David's passionate commentary painted pictures of the animals' lives and behaviors. But Martha found herself drifting in and out of focus, lost in thoughts of what should have been, of the safari they had planned together for so many years. As the golden African sun began its descent, The jeep turned back toward the lodge. Martha watched the landscape slip by, painted in amber hues that transformed the savanna into a living watercolor. The beauty was undeniable, but it felt like watching a movie through a window. She could see it, but couldn't quite feel part of it, separated by an invisible barrier of grief. In her room that evening, Martha opened her journal, the pages crisp and white in the soft lamplight. Her pen hovered over the blank page before she wrote, "The elephants were extraordinary, but it wasn't enough to fill this emptiness." She closed the journal quietly, listening to the distant calls of night birds carrying across the African plains. The morning sun painted long shadows across Martha's room as she sat at the edge of her bed, unable to shake the emptiness that had followed her through another solitary dinner. Her fingers traced the worn edges of Robert's journal, landing on a detailed sketch of a walking trail near the lodge. "The eastern path offers the best views at sunrise," she read aloud, Robert's handwriting as familiar as his voice in her memory. "The wildlife is most active then." Making up her mind, Martha packed a small canvas bag with essentials, a water bottle, Robert's journal, and a light jacket. The lodge was quiet as she slipped out, nodding to a sleepy-eyed staff member at the front desk. The morning air felt crisp against her face as she followed the trail markers. Unlike yesterday's structured safari, this felt more personal, more like the adventure she and Robert had dreamed of sharing. She noticed details she had missed from the jeep, delicate spider webs glistening with dew, the intricate patterns of animal tracks in the dusty earth. An hour into her walk, Martha paused to catch her breath. That's when she heard it, a high-pitched, distressed cry carrying on the morning breeze. Her heart quickened as she recognized the sound from yesterday's safari, an elephant, but younger, desperate. Following the sound, Martha came upon a dried-up riverbed. Her breath caught in her throat. Below, a baby elephant struggled in the deep trench, its small legs unable to find purchase on the steep walls. The calf's skin looked dry and dusty, its eyes showing clear signs of exhaustion. "Oh, you poor thing," Martha whispered. Despite her fear, she found herself carefully making her way down the embankment. The baby elephant trumpeted weakly at her approach. "Shh, it's okay," she soothed, her grandmother's instincts taking over. "I'm not going to hurt you." She uncapped her water bottle and slowly extended it. The calf's trunk reached out tentatively, and Martha's heart melted as it accepted the offering. "That's it, little one," she murmured, inching closer. "We'll figure this out together." As she sat beside the frightened calf, a distant rumbling caught her attention. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, and the unmistakable calls of adult elephants filled the air. The baby elephant perked up, answering with a loud cry. Martha's body tensed, her heart pounding as the rumbling grew closer. She sat perfectly still, caught between her instinct to flee and her unwillingness to abandon the calf. Martha's heart thundered in her chest as the ground beneath her trembled. The elephant herd's approach sent vibrations through the dried riverbed, and dust clouds billowed around her. She glanced at the steep walls, too high to climb quickly. The baby elephant pressed closer to her, seeking comfort. Massive gray forms appeared at the riverbed's edge, their tusks gleaming in the morning light. The matriarch, distinguished by her towering height and weathered skin, stood directly above them. Martha held her breath, fighting the urge to run. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than the baby. "We're okay." The herd moved with surprising grace for their size, positioning themselves in a protective circle around the riverbed. The matriarch's intelligent eyes studied Martha, who remained perfectly still. Then, something extraordinary happened. The elephants began to dig. Their powerful trunks scooped away layers of dried earth, working in perfect synchronization. Martha watched in amazement as water began to seep through the freshly exposed soil. Within minutes, a small pool formed. The baby elephant stumbled forward, drinking eagerly from the life-giving water. Martha's own throat felt parched, and after a moment's hesitation, she cupped her hands and drank alongside the calf. The water tasted earthy and sweet. The matriarch stood guard, her ears flicking occasionally, while the other elephants maintained their protective formation. Martha felt tears well up in her eyes at this display of compassion and intelligence. These creatures weren't just surviving, they were helping each other, helping her. The quiet moment was shattered by the distant roar of engines. The elephants shifted uneasily, and Martha heard shouting voices approaching. "Stay back! There are poachers in the area!" A ranger's voice carried down to the riverbed. The herd began to move, their peaceful formation breaking apart as vehicle engines grew louder. Strong hands reached down from above as the rangers helped Martha climb out of the riverbed. Her legs trembled, both from exhaustion and leftover adrenaline. The baby elephant below let out a high-pitched trumpet of distress, its trunk reaching up toward her. "Easy there, little one," one of the rangers called, extending a rope ladder. But the baby elephant ignored it, pacing anxiously and making soft whimpering sounds that tugged at Martha's heart. "It's okay," Martha said softly, kneeling at the edge. "We'll get you out, too." In the distance, the matriarch Grace stood watching, her massive form silhouetted against the morning sky. The rest of the herd waited behind her, their bodies still and alert. The lead ranger approached Martha, his expression serious. "I'm Peter Okello. Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here alone. We've had reports of poachers in the area." Martha brushed dust from her clothes. "Poachers?" Peter nodded grimly. "They're using new technology now, drones, night vision. These elephants are especially at risk because they sometimes wander close to the settlements." He gestured toward the distressed calf. "This little one seems quite attached to you. We'll need to take it to the rescue station until we can safely reunite it with the herd." The baby elephant finally allowed itself to be guided up a makeshift ramp, but instead of following the ranger's directions, it immediately pressed against Martha's side. Its trunk wrapped gently around her wrist, like a child holding a parent's hand. "Well, that's something you don't see every day," Peter remarked, his eyebrows raised. "They rarely trust humans this quickly." Martha placed her free hand on the baby's head, feeling its rough, warm skin. "What will happen to it?" "We'll keep it safe at the station while we deal with the poacher situation," Peter explained as they walked toward the vehicles. "But we need to move quickly. The herd's safety depends on it." In the distance, Grace trumpeted once, a deep, resonant sound, before turning to lead the herd away. Martha watched them go, feeling the weight of the baby elephant still pressing trustingly against her side. During the drive back to the lodge, the baby elephant made soft, chirping sounds, its trunk occasionally reaching out to touch Martha's shoulder. The gentle rocking of the vehicle seemed to calm it. "The next few days will be crucial," Peter said from the driver's seat. "If we can't stop these poachers, this little one might not have a herd to return to." Martha stroked the baby elephant's trunk, her heart heavy with concern. What had started as a solitary morning walk had transformed into something far more significant. Martha stood by the window of her lodge room, her fingers drumming against the wooden windowsill. The setting sun painted the savanna in deep oranges and purples, but she barely noticed the beautiful view. Her mind kept returning to the baby elephant's frightened trumpets and Peter's grave warnings about poachers. "They're out there right now," she whispered to herself, wrapping her arms around her body. The thought of those magnificent creatures being hunted made her stomach clench. She moved away from the window and pulled Robert's worn leather journal from her bag. Settling into the oversized armchair, Martha ran her fingers over the familiar pages. Robert's neat handwriting filled the margins with observations about elephant behavior and intelligence. One passage caught her eye. These creatures possess an emotional depth that rivals our own. Their capacity for love, grief, and joy is extraordinary. We have so much to learn from them. Martha's eyes welled up as she remembered a conversation with Robert over breakfast years ago. He had been reading about an elephant sanctuary in Kenya. "You should see how they connect with their caretakers, Martha," he had said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's like they can see right into your soul." Now she understood exactly what he meant. The way the baby elephant had trusted her, how the herd had worked together to help them both. It awakened something inside her that had been dormant since Robert's passing. Martha closed the journal and walked to the house phone. "Reception? Yes. Could you tell me how to reach the wildlife rescue team?" "The young woman at reception, Sarah," responded warmly. "Of course, Mrs. Walker. They're just a few kilometers from here. I can arrange transportation for you tomorrow morning if you'd like." "That would be wonderful," Martha replied, her voice growing stronger. "Do you think they'll let me help?" "They always welcome volunteers," Sarah assured her. "Especially now with all the poaching activity. And after what happened today with the baby elephant, they'll definitely want to talk to you." Martha thanked her and began gathering what she might need for tomorrow. Her hands trembled slightly as she packed a small bag with water, sunscreen, and Robert's journal. She picked up the photograph the rangers had taken of Spirit. That's what they had named the baby elephant. In the image, the young calf's trunk was reaching toward Martha, its eyes seeming to plead for help. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Martha held the photo close. "If Robert believed in me, I have to try," she whispered to herself. The words felt right, like a key fitting into a lock. She placed the photo carefully in her bag, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Martha pulled up to the wildlife rescue base in a dusty Jeep. Her heart thumped as she took in the modest collection of buildings surrounded by wire fencing. Staff members hustled about, carrying supplies and calling out to each other. Taking a deep breath, Martha clutched Robert's journal and approached the main office. Before she could knock, a tall man with weathered features stepped out, his expression stern. "Sam Morgan," he said curtly. "You must be the tourist who found our baby elephant yesterday." Martha nodded. "Martha Walker. I'd like to help." Sam's eyes narrowed. "Look, Mrs. Walker, we appreciate your concern, but this isn't a petting zoo. We deal with serious conservation work here." "I understand that," Martha said, her voice stronger than she expected. She opened Robert's journal, showing Sam the detailed sketches and notes. "My husband studied these animals for years. I may be new to this, but I care deeply about what happens to them." Sam glanced at the journal, his expression softening slightly. "Caring isn't enough. We need people who can handle the daily grind." "Then let me prove myself," Martha insisted. Sam sighed. "Fine. You can start by helping clean the treatment areas. We'll see how long you last." Throughout the morning, Martha threw herself into every task Sam assigned. She scrubbed feeding bowls, organized medical supplies, and watched intently as the team treated an injured zebra's leg. Around midday, she heard a familiar trumpet. Spirit was awake in its enclosure, trunk reaching toward her as she passed. Martha's heart melted at the sight. "Hello, little one," she said softly, approaching the fence. "I think I'll call you Spirit. You certainly have plenty of it." The baby elephant wrapped its trunk gently around her arm through the fence, making soft rumbling sounds. The tender moment drew the attention of several staff members, including Sam. "That's unusual. Sam said, walking up beside her. "Spirit's been wary of everyone else." Martha smiled, gently stroking Spirit's trunk. "We've been through quite a lot together already." As the day drew to a close, Martha stood watching Spirit settle down for sleep in its enclosure. The baby elephant's chest rose and fell peacefully, trunk curled close. Sam's boots crunched on the gravel behind her. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "maybe I was too quick to judge. Spirit certainly seems to trust you, and we could use an extra pair of hands around here." Martha's eyes stayed fixed on Spirit, but her heart swelled with hope. "Thank you, Sam. I won't let you down." The first rays of sunlight filtered through Martha's window at the rescue base, accompanied by the distant calls of birds. Her muscles ached from yesterday's work, but she felt a spark of excitement as she prepared for her first full day of training. In the small dining area, the smell of coffee and toast filled the air. Sam stood by a bulletin board covered in maps, while two unfamiliar faces sat at the wooden table. "Martha, meet Amara and Jonas," Sam gestured. "They'll show you the ropes today." Amara, a woman with kind eyes and braided hair, smiled warmly. "Welcome to our little family." She passed Martha a mug of coffee. Jonas, tall and lean, gave a quiet nod. Over the next few days, Martha's world expanded with new knowledge. Amara taught her about elephant behavior, showing her how to read their body language and recognize distress signals. "See how Spirit's ears move when she's happy?" Amara pointed out during a feeding session. "That's a good sign." Jonas took her into the field, teaching her to spot elephant tracks and set up camera traps. Martha's hands trembled as she attached the delicate equipment to trees, but Jonas's patience never wavered. "Steady hands come with practice," he assured her. The physical demands challenged her aging body. Her back protested as she carried equipment, and her feet developed blisters from long walks. But each evening, when Spirit greeted her with gentle trunk touches, the pain seemed worth it. "Poachers use everything from drones to local informants," Jonas explained one afternoon while checking the cameras. "We have to stay one step ahead." Martha's evenings belonged to Spirit. She'd sit near the enclosure, watching the baby elephant play with water or toss hay around. Sometimes she'd read aloud from Robert's journal, and Spirit would listen, trunk swaying gently. As the sun set on her fourth day, Martha sat cross-legged near Spirit's enclosure. The baby elephant's trunk reached through the fence, gently touching her shoulder. "We're going to get through this together," she whispered, patting the trunk softly. From the main building, Sam watched silently, a thoughtful expression crossing his usually stern face. The distant whir of a drone pulled Martha from her sleep before dawn. Her heart raced as she hurried to the window, where she could just make out a small dark shape against the pale morning sky. Outside, Sam and Jonas stood rigid, their faces tense, as they tracked the drone's movement with binoculars. "They're getting bolder," Sam said as Martha joined them. "These aren't amateur poachers anymore. They've got better equipment than we do." Jonas pointed to a map spread across the hood of their Jeep. "They're using the drones to find the herds before we can move them to safety. Makes our job nearly impossible." And throughout the morning, the team patrolled the boundaries of their territory. Through her binoculars, Martha spotted 3 men in the distance, huddled around what looked like a laptop. "There they are," Sam whispered, his jaw tight. "Just far enough away that we can't touch them. Smart." The elephant herd was visibly agitated. Grace, the majestic matriarch, paced back and forth, her ears flapping in distress. The younger elephants huddled close together, while Spirit pressed against Martha's leg, trembling slightly. "We need to move them," Amara said, watching the herd through her binoculars. But Grace isn't budging. This is their home territory. All the water sources they know, all their usual paths. Martha knelt beside Spirit, running her hand along the baby elephant's trunk. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, though her own voice shook. The calf's trust in her was touching, but it made her feel even more responsible. Sam tried to guide the herd toward safer ground, but Grace stood her ground, trumpeting in protest. The other elephants followed her lead, refusing to leave their familiar territory. Back at the base that evening, Sam slammed his fist against the wall. They've got drones, night vision gear, probably thermal imaging, too. And what do we have? Basic radios and a few old vehicles. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. How are we supposed to protect them like this? Martha sat quietly at the corner table, still hearing the ominous buzz of the drone in the distance. She watched as Sam paced the room, his worry evident in every step. The sound grew louder, then faded again, a reminder of the threat that loomed over them all. The radio crackled to life at dawn, jolting Martha from her uneasy sleep. "Emergency at Post 3, a frantic voice called out. "The herd's been hit. Grace is down." Sam burst into action, grabbing medical supplies while shouting orders. "Amara, get your kit. Jonas, the tranq gun." Martha's hand shook as she helped load the jeep, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. They drove at breakneck speed through the bush, the sun barely clearing the horizon. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. Grace lay on her side, blood staining her leg, while the rest of the herd circled nervously around her. The younger elephants huddled close to Spirit, who stood steady despite the tension. "Bullet wound," Amara announced, kneeling beside Grace. "Clean through the leg, but she's losing blood." The vet worked quickly, cleaning and treating the wound while Sam and Jonas scanned the area, rifles ready. Martha felt rooted to the spot, her chest tight with guilt. "This is my fault," she whispered. "If I hadn't drawn attention to them." "Stop that," Sam said firmly, though his eyes never left the tree line. "These poachers were coming anyway. At least now the herd has people who care fighting for them." Grace trumpeted weakly as Amara finished bandaging her leg. The sound sent ripples of distress through the herd. Spirit broke away from the group, pressing against Martha's side. The baby elephant's trunk gently touched her hand, as if offering comfort. "We need to stay with them tonight," Amara announced, packing up her supplies. "Grace can't move far, and they're vulnerable." As darkness fell, they set up camp nearby. The fire cast orange shadows across their worried faces. Martha sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars shine above the African plain. "I can't fail them, Robert," she whispered into the night. "I won't." The morning sun cast long shadows across the rescue base as the team trudged back from their night watch. Martha's boots felt heavy, matching the weight in her chest. Grace's bandaged leg served as a stark reminder of their close call, and the usually bustling base felt eerily quiet. "Get some rest, everyone," Sam called out, his voice hoarse from the long night. Martha slipped away to her small room without a word. The walls seemed to close in as she sat on her bed, the events of the night playing over and over in her mind. "I should never have gotten involved," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling. A soft knock at her window made her look up. Spirit stood outside, trunk pressed against the glass. Even in her darkest moment, the sight brought a tiny smile to her face. Reaching for Robert's journal, Martha ran her fingers over the worn leather cover. As she flipped through the familiar pages, something fluttered to the floor. It was a photograph, creased but clear. Her own younger face smiled back at her, holding a homemade sign. "Courage changes everything." The memory hit her like a wave. Robert had taken this picture the day she'd decided to go back to school at 55. "You're braver than you know, Martha," he'd said. "You just need reminding sometimes." Wiping her eyes, Martha pulled out a blank notebook. Robert's journal lay open beside her, full of detailed notes about elephant behavior and conservation tactics. She began to sketch and write, ideas flowing faster than she could capture them. Hours passed as she worked, Spirit's occasional gentle trumpeting keeping her company through the window. When evening came, Martha heard the team gathering for their nightly briefing. Her heart pounded as she collected her notes. In the common room, Sam stood at a makeshift whiteboard discussing patrol schedules. "Excuse me," Martha said quietly, her voice stronger than she expected. "I have some ideas I'd like to share." The room fell silent. Sam raised an eyebrow, but nodded for her to continue. Martha stepped forward, holding her notebook tight. "I've been studying Robert's notes on herd protection, and I think there might be a way we can use the poachers' own tactics against them." The morning sun cast long shadows across the rescue base as Martha spread Robert's journal on the meeting room table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she pointed to his detailed sketches of the terrain. "Here," she said, tracing a route with her finger. "Robert mapped out these natural barriers years ago. The ridges form a protective corridor that leads to this secluded valley." Sam leaned over the journal, his brow furrowed. "It's risky. The herd's never been moved that far before." "But look," Martha continued, pulling out a map of Ranger Patrol zones. "If we coordinate with the other stations, we can create a protected pathway. The rock formations would make it harder for drones to track them." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "The vegetation there is good too. Plenty of water sources." "I still don't like it," Sam muttered, but his expression had softened. He studied Martha's face, seeing the quiet determination in her eyes. After a long moment, he sighed. "But it might be our best shot." The team spent the next few hours preparing for the move. Jonas set up false trails to confuse any tracking devices, while Amara gathered medical supplies for Grace. Martha worked alongside them, helping to load equipment and check radio frequencies. What surprised everyone most was Spirit's behavior. The young elephants seemed to understand the urgency of their mission. As they began slowly guiding the herd, Spirit moved confidently between the younger elephants, using gentle nudges and soft trumpeting sounds to keep them moving together. "I've never seen anything like it," Amara whispered to Martha as they watched Spirit guide two calves around a boulder. "It's like the little one knows exactly what we need." Martha's chest swelled with pride as she observed Spirit's leadership. The baby elephant she'd found trapped in the riverbed was now helping to save the entire herd. The team moved carefully, maintaining radio contact as they guided the elephants through the landscape. Grace, though still favoring her injured leg, walked with dignity at the rear of the group. Every few minutes she would pause to touch trunks with Spirit, as if passing on her wisdom to the younger generation. Sam walked beside Martha, his earlier skepticism replaced by focused determination. "Your husband," he said quietly, "he must have been quite something to map all this out." "He believed in protecting what matters," Martha replied, her voice thick with emotion. When they finally reached the temporary safe zone, everyone exhaled deeply. The elephants gathered around a water source. Their movements relaxed for the first time in days. Spirit bounded over to Martha, wrapping its trunk around her arm in a familiar gesture. Sam approached them, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. "You might just have a knack for this after all," he said, patting Martha's shoulder. Martha smiled, feeling Spirit's gentle presence beside her. In that moment, she felt more certain of her purpose than she had since Robert's passing. The morning sun painted long shadows across the new territory as Martha and the team observed the herd from their observation post. The elephants moved cautiously through the unfamiliar terrain, testing the ground with their trunks and exploring the vegetation. Spirit, who had grown so much in recent weeks, stayed close to the younger calves. "Look at that," Amara whispered, pointing to Spirit's movements. The young elephant was mimicking Grace's signature head tilt and trunk gestures, carefully guiding two smaller elephants toward a patch of fresh grass. Martha's heart swelled with pride. It's amazing how much Spirit has learned from Grace. Sam nodded, his usual stern expression softening. Natural leadership isn't just about size or strength. It's about instinct and heart. The peaceful morning didn't last long. Around midday, the herd began showing signs of anxiety. Several elephants shifted restlessly, their ears flapping in agitation. Grace, still moving slowly due to her injury, struggled to maintain her usual commanding presence. "The herd needs stability right now," Jonas said, setting up another camera trap. "Grace's injury is making them nervous." Martha watched as Spirit approached the agitated elephants. The young one moved with surprising confidence, gently nudging the smaller calves toward a grove of acacia trees that provided ample shade. The other elephants followed, their anxiety visibly decreasing in the cooler area. "That's remarkable," Amara said, making notes in her observation log. "Spirit is displaying classic matriarchal behavior." The team worked through the afternoon, installing additional monitoring equipment. Martha helped position solar-powered sensors while keeping an eye on the herd. Spirit continued to stay attentive to the younger ones, always keeping them within Trunk's reach, just as Grace had done countless times before. As the day cooled into evening, Martha sat on a fallen log near the observation post, watching Spirit guide the calves to a small watering hole. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the savanna, and the herd seemed more settled than they had been all day. Sam approached, his boots crunching on the dry grass. He stood beside Martha, watching Spirit with an appraising eye. "I've seen leaders grow in tough times," he said thoughtfully. "That little one might be one of them." Martha smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride as she watched Spirit tenderly shepherd the young ones back to the main herd. The morning sun had barely risen when Jonas spotted the drone. Its faint buzzing grew louder as it circled above their camp, a mechanical predator hunting its prey. Martha's heart sank as she watched Sam's face darken with concern. "Everyone inside now," Sam ordered, his voice tight with tension. They huddled in the main cabin, drawing the curtains. Jonas burst through the door, his usual calm demeanor shattered. "The camera traps near the eastern border, they're all disabled, and the sensor alarms we set up yesterday, completely destroyed." Amara shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. Nobody knew where we placed them except us and the locals we trusted," Sam finished, his jaw clenched. Martha felt her stomach twist. She'd seen how carefully they'd guarded their plans, how selective they'd been with information. "Someone betrayed us?" she whispered. "Has to be," Jonas said, pacing the room. "The way the equipment was damaged, they knew exactly where to look." Martha watched Sam's face grow stormy as he rifled through their recent interactions with villagers. "That man," he muttered, "the one who kept asking about our patrol schedules, said he was interested in conservation work." "Malik?" Amara's eyes widened. "But he's been helping us for weeks." "Perfect cover," Jonas spat. "He probably reported everything straight to the poachers." The tension in the room crackled like electricity. Jonas slammed his hand against the wall, making Martha jump. "We should have been more careful. Now the whole operation is compromised." "This isn't helping," Sam growled. "We need to focus on—" "Focus," Amara cut in. "We don't even know who we can trust anymore." Martha watched as her teammates turned on each other, their fears and frustrations boiling over. She thought of Spirit and the herd, vulnerable while they argued. Taking a deep breath, she stepped between them. "Stop," she said firmly. "Every minute we spend fighting is a minute we're not protecting the elephants." She turned to Sam. "You're right to be angry. We've been betrayed. But right now, Grace is still recovering, and Spirit needs us. The herd needs us." The room fell silent. Sam's shoulders relaxed slightly as he nodded. "Martha's right. We can deal with the traitor later. Right now, we need to secure the perimeter and move the herd deeper into the protected zone." As darkness settled over the camp that night, they took turns standing guard. Martha sat at her small desk, Robert's journal open before her. By lamplight, she wrote, "Trust is fragile, but so is hope. Both must be protected." The morning sun cast long shadows across the rescue base as Martha approached Sam. He was studying a map, his brow furrowed with worry. "Sam, I've been thinking," Martha said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We need the community on our side." He looked up, skeptical. "The same community that might be harboring our traitor?" "Yes," Martha insisted, "because for every person working against us, there could be 10 willing to help. They just need to understand what we're fighting for." Sam rubbed his temples. "And how do you propose we do that?" "By sharing Spirit's story, showing them what these elephants mean to their land, their future." Martha pulled out her phone, showing him photos of Spirit leading the younger calves. People protect what they care about. After a long pause, Sam nodded reluctantly. "Take Jonas and Amara with you. Be careful." That afternoon, Martha found herself in the first village, surrounded by curious but wary faces. Children peeked from behind their parents as she showed photographs of Spirit and the herd. "The poachers threaten more than just elephants," she explained, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "They threaten the very heart of your land." An elderly farmer stepped forward. "Pretty words, but the poachers have guns. They have money. What can we do?" "Be our eyes and ears," Amara suggested. "Report suspicious activities. Help us protect the routes the herd uses." A young boy pushed through the crowd, pointing at a photo of Spirit. "The baby elephant is brave," he said. "Like my sister when she stands up to bullies at school." Martha smiled. "Yes, exactly like that. And just like your sister needs help sometimes, Spirit and the herd need our help too." Slowly, heads began to nod. A farmer offered to report drone sightings over his fields. Another suggested safe paths through their lands that the herd could use. As they visited more villages, support grew. Some offered to help maintain camera traps, while others agreed to send warning signals if they spotted poachers. Back at the base that evening, Martha watched Spirit guiding younger elephants to a water hole, showing them how to drink safely. The sight filled her with hope. Sam appeared beside her. "I didn't think it would work," he admitted quietly. "But you've got people talking. That's a start." The morning sun cast long shadows across the savannah as Martha rode beside Sam in the patrol vehicle. The routine check had been quiet until now. A sharp crack split the air, followed by several more. Gunshots. "They're back," Sam growled, spinning the wheel. Martha's heart pounded as she gripped the dashboard. Through the radio, Jonas's voice crackled with urgency. "Multiple vehicles spotted near the eastern ridge." They raced toward the sound, dust billowing behind them. Martha could see the herd in the distance, and her blood ran cold at the sight of 3 trucks converging on their position. The poachers had indeed returned with reinforcements. "They're trying to funnel them into the ravine," Amara shouted from the back seat, pointing to where several armed men were positioning themselves. But before the poachers could execute their plan, a high-pitched trumpet pierced the air. Spirit, now nearly shoulder height to the adult elephants, had spotted the danger. The young elephant's warning call rang out across the plain, clear and urgent. The herd responded immediately, changing direction away from the trap. "Look at Spirit," Martha whispered, watching in awe as the young elephant guided several calves behind the larger adults. Sam drove the vehicle between the poachers and the herd, while Jonas and 2 other rangers approached from different directions. The standoff grew tense as both sides held their positions. Martha could see the poachers' frustration as their carefully laid plan unraveled. Suddenly, a young bull elephant broke from the herd's defensive formation. With ears spread wide and trunk raised, he charged toward the nearest poacher truck. The men scattered, dropping equipment as they ran. Their vehicles reversed hastily, tires spinning in the dirt. "Keep pressure on their flanks," Sam ordered through the radio. The team used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, herding the poachers away from the elephants and toward the areas where they knew ranger reinforcements would be waiting. The poachers retreated, but their leader shouted threats as they disappeared into the bush. "We'll be back, with more men." As the dust settled, Martha watched Spirit return to the herd, still alert but calmer now. The young elephant had grown so much, not just in size, but in courage and leadership. The other elephants gathered around, touching trunks in reassurance. That evening, back at the base, the team gathered in the common room. The weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air. Sam paced, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "We got lucky today," he admitted, stopping to lean against the wall. "But luck won't hold forever. We need something better." Martha watched Spirit through the window, where the young elephant stood protectively near the younger calves. "We'll find a way," she said firmly. "Spirit just showed us that standing together works." Inside the rescue base, a map sprawled across the wooden table, marked with red X's showing recent poacher sightings. Sam traced potential routes with his finger, while Martha spread out her sketches of decoy elephants. "We could use local materials, bamboo, dried grass, and cloth," Martha explained, pointing to her drawings. "Position them here and here to draw them in." Sam nodded slowly. "If we combine that with snares in these narrow passes," he looked at Jonas. "Could you set those up without leaving obvious tracks?" "Yes," Jonas replied. "I know paths they won't expect us to use." Over the next 3 days, the base buzzed with activity. Villagers arrived with bundles of bamboo and grass, working alongside the team to build life-sized elephant decoys. Their skilled hands wove the materials together, creating surprisingly realistic shapes in the dim light of dawn. Jonas moved like a shadow through the landscape, setting up snares and tripwires in strategic locations. He carefully disguised each trap, making them invisible to untrained eyes. Amara converted an old storage shed into a medical station, organizing supplies and preparing for any injuries. "Better safe than sorry," she said, checking her inventory of bandages and medications. Martha helped position the decoys, making sure they looked natural from a distance. The fake herd took shape, positioned to funnel any attackers into the prepared zones. More villagers arrived with news of suspicious vehicles and drone sightings. "They're getting closer," an elderly farmer reported, his face creased with worry. Sam gathered everyone for a final briefing as the sun set. "Tomorrow could be the day," he said, his voice steady but serious. "Everyone knows their positions?" The team nodded. Martha glanced over at Spirit's enclosure, where the young elephant stood calmly. "This is for all of you," she whispered. "We won't let them win." The darkness wrapped around them like a thick blanket as Martha crouched behind a cluster of acacia trees. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Next to her, Sam held up his hand, signaling complete silence. The decoy elephants, carefully crafted from local materials, stood like ghostly sentinels in the moonless night. Jonas's whispered voice crackled through their radio. "Spirit and the herd are secure. 2 kilometers east." The first sign came as a low mechanical hum, drones searching the landscape. Then came the distant rumble of engines. Martha's fingers tightened around her flashlight as headlights cut through the darkness. "Hold," Sam breathed. The poachers' vehicles crept closer, their lights sweeping across the decoys. Martha could make out dark figures moving with practiced precision, their rifles glinting dully. They approached the fake herd, completely fooled by the elaborate sculptures. A sharp snap pierced the night, the first snare triggered. A shout of surprise followed by confusion. More snaps as additional traps activated. "Now!" Sam's voice rang out. Martha and the team burst into action. Flashlights blazed from multiple directions, accompanied by sharp whistle blasts that shattered the night's silence. The poachers stumbled, momentarily blinded and disoriented. From the north and south, villagers emerged, blocking the escape routes with their vehicles. The poachers scattered, tripping over hidden tripwires. Two fell hard, their weapons clattering away. "They're running!" Amar called out. Martha's flashlight beam caught a poacher trying to untangle himself from a snare. His eyes met hers for a moment, wide with panic, before he abandoned his rifle and fled into the darkness. The sound of engines roared as the remaining poachers retreated, leaving behind equipment and vehicles. Their drones, now useless without operators, hovered aimlessly before dropping from the sky. When silence finally returned, Martha's hands were shaking. She made her way to Spirit, who waited calmly with Jonas. The young elephant's trunk reached out to touch her arm, as if checking that she was all right. "We did it, for now," Martha said, hugging Spirit's trunk while the team gathered around them, their faces showing equal measures of relief and determination. The morning sun cast long shadows across the savannah as Martha helped collect scattered equipment left behind by the poachers. Her muscles ached from the previous night's confrontation, but determination kept her moving. Sam approached, his face etched with concern. "They'll be back," he said, picking up a broken drone. "And angrier this time. We hurt their pride as much as their operation." As if confirming his words, Jonas's voice crackled over the radio. "Movement spotted 10 kilometers south. At least 3 vehicles. They're gathering reinforcements." Martha's stomach tightened. She glanced at Spirit, who stood watchfully near the herd, trunk raised to catch any unfamiliar scents. The attack came that afternoon, more brutal than before. Engines roared as vehicles burst from multiple directions, trying to cut off the herd's escape routes. Spirit trumpeted a warning call, immediately gathering the younger elephants. The little ones huddled close, following Spirit's lead away from the danger zone. Grace, despite her injury, planted herself firmly with the other adults. They formed a protective circle, their massive bodies creating a living wall. Martha watched in awe as Spirit guided the young ones to safety, displaying an intelligence that seemed beyond her years. "They're trying to split the herd," Sam shouted, organizing the team's defense. Villagers emerged from their hiding spots, throwing the poachers' plans into chaos. Some launched decoy flares, while others used mirrors to reflect the harsh afternoon sun into the poachers' eyes. In the midst of the chaos, Spirit's trumpet rang out, clear and commanding. The sound rippled through the air, and something extraordinary happened. The entire herd, young and old, unified under her call. With Spirit at the lead, they charged forward as one massive force. The poachers faced with tons of determined elephant flesh, scattered in panic. Vehicles spun wildly, crashing into each other as they tried to escape. The ground trembled under the herd's coordinated attack, dust billowing in their wake. Martha held her breath, watching Spirit guide the charge with precision that seemed impossible for one so young. The poachers fled, leaving behind vehicles and equipment in their desperation to escape. When the dust settled, Spirit trotted back to Martha, her trunk gently wrapping around Martha's wrist. Sam stood beside them, shaking his head in amazement. "That little one," he said, voice filled with wonder, "just saved us all." Martha helped sort through the abandoned equipment scattered across their base. Drones, tracking devices, and weapons lay in neat piles as Jonas cataloged each item. The morning air felt lighter somehow, despite their exhaustion. "These aren't cheap," Sam said, examining a high-tech drone. "Taking these out of their hands will hurt their operation more than anything else we've done." Amara emerged from the medical tent with good news. "Grace's wound is healing nicely. The infection risk is down, and she's moving much better today." Martha walked to the observation point where she could see the herd grazing peacefully. Grace stood tall among them, her step steady and sure. Nearby, Spirit guided 3 younger elephants toward a water source, mimicking the gentle authority Martha had often seen Grace display. "Look at that," Jonas said, joining her. "Spirit's a natural leader, just like someone else I know." He smiled at Martha. The villagers began arriving throughout the morning, bringing food and supplies. Children gathered at the fence, pointing excitedly at Spirit and whispering about the brave baby elephant who helped save the herd. "We couldn't have done this without them," Martha said, watching the community come together. "Or without Spirit showing us the way." Sam nodded, his usual gruffness softened by pride. "That little one taught us all something about courage, and you taught us about the power of working together." As evening approached, the team gathered in the common area. The mood was celebratory, but calm. Sam raised his coffee mug high. "To the smallest hero with the biggest heart," he announced, looking at Spirit in the nearby enclosure. Martha opened Robert's journal and wrote carefully, "Together, we found strength, just like you always said we would." Martha stood at the edge of the savannah as the sun painted the grasslands in warm golden hues. Her heart swelled as she watched Spirit confidently guiding the younger elephants through their morning play. The little ones trumpeted joyfully, following Spirit's lead with complete trust. "She's come so far," Sam said, joining Martha. "Hard to believe she was that scared baby we found just weeks ago." Martha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The rescue team had confirmed that the poachers had retreated across the border, their operation crippled by the loss of their equipment. The herd was safe, at least for now. "I never imagined this when I first arrived," Martha said softly. "I was just trying to fulfill Robert's dream. Instead, I found my own." Later that morning, Martha gathered her belongings and prepared to say her goodbyes. Amara hugged her tightly, whispering thanks for bringing the team closer together. Jonas, usually quiet, surprised her with a warm embrace. "The herd will always have a protector in you," he said. Sam approached, holding something in his weathered hands. "We wanted you to have this," he said, presenting her with a small carved elephant. The wooden figure was smooth and beautiful, capturing Spirit's playful expression perfectly. But the hardest farewell was still to come. Spirit approached Martha slowly, trunk extended. Martha knelt down, tears flowing freely now as the young elephant gently touched her face. The bond between them felt almost tangible in that moment. "You're going to be an amazing leader," Martha whispered, running her hand along Spirit's trunk. "Thank you for showing me my strength." Spirit made a soft rumbling sound, pressing closer to Martha. The other elephants watched from a distance, with Grace standing proud despite her healing wounds. Martha could have sworn she saw understanding in their eyes. As the team's vehicle prepared to take her to the airport, Martha took one last look at the savannah. Spirit stood with her herd, no longer the frightened calf she'd first encountered. The morning light caught the dust in the air, creating a golden halo around the elephants. On the plain, Martha held the carved elephant tightly as she watched the savannah stretch endlessly below. "Goodbye, Spirit," she whispered. "I'll never forget you." Martha sat at her wooden desk, surrounded by a collection of memories spread before her. Photos of Spirit and the herd were scattered across the surface, while maps marked with patrol routes and safe zones lay partially unfolded. Robert's leather-bound journal sat in the center, its pages now dog-eared and worn from constant reference. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she stared at the blank document. "How do I even begin to tell this story?" she whispered, picking up a photo of Spirit leading the younger elephants to safety. The memories washed over her. The first time she heard Spirit's frightened cries in the dried riverbed, the trust in those big brown eyes, the way the baby elephant's trunk would gently wrap around her arm for comfort. The words began to flow. As she wrote, Martha kept reaching for Robert's journal, running her fingers over his neat handwriting. His detailed observations about elephant behavior and their social structures helped her paint a fuller picture. She smiled at his sketches of elephant families, now understanding their dynamics so much better after her time with the herd. "Dear Sam," she typed in a separate email, "I'm writing our story and I want to make sure I get every detail right. Could you verify some dates and events for me?" She attached her draft notes about the final confrontation with the poachers, wanting to capture the courage shown by both the team and the elephants accurately. The rescue team's responses arrived quickly, filled with additional details she had forgotten. Sam's email included recent photos of Spirit, showing how the young elephant had grown into her leadership role. Martha's heart swelled with pride as she incorporated these updates into her manuscript. Working late into the evening, Martha wove together the technical details from Robert's journal with her personal experiences. She described the terror of facing down poachers, the joy of watching Spirit grow confident, and the triumph of bringing the community together to protect the herd. Robert's presence felt especially strong as she wrote. His passion for wildlife conservation, captured in the pages of his journal, seemed to guide her words. She could almost hear his encouraging voice as she described the elephants he had so longed to see. Finally, Martha typed the last sentence of her memoir. Tears blurred her vision as she looked at Robert's smiling photo on her desk. "We did it, love. This story is ours." Martha sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of letters from readers around the world. Her memoir, Spirit of the Herd, had touched more hearts than she could have imagined. She picked up one envelope with childlike handwriting and carefully opened it. "Dear Mrs. Walker," she read aloud, "your book made me cry. Spirit is my hero, and I want to help save elephants too." The letter included a crayon drawing of a baby elephant standing tall among its herd. Her phone buzzed with another invitation to speak at a conservation event. These days, her calendar was filled with appearances at wildlife foundations and fundraising galas. Just last week, she had addressed a packed auditorium in Chicago, sharing Spirit's journey from a trapped, frightened calf to a brave young leader. "The most powerful weapon against poaching isn't guns or fences," she had told the audience. "It's hope. Hope that brings communities together. Hope that inspires change." Her words had moved many to tears and, more importantly, to action. The donations had started flowing in. Sam's latest email reported that the rescue team had purchased new monitoring equipment and hired additional staff. They were even planning to expand their protection zone. Martha spread out the latest batch of letters on her table. Children's drawings of elephants mixed with heartfelt notes from adults who had found courage in her story. One woman wrote about how Spirit's bravery had inspired her to make major life changes. A school class had sent a group project about elephant conservation, complete with photos of their fundraising bake sale. At a recent wildlife benefit in New York, Martha had shown photos of Spirit leading the younger elephants to safety. The image of the small elephant standing tall against danger had resonated deeply with the audience. That evening alone had raised enough money to fund a year's worth of anti-poaching patrols. Now, sitting by her window with the afternoon sun streaming in, Martha sorted through more children's artwork of Spirit. Each crayon drawing and watercolor painting captured something special about the brave little elephant who had changed so many lives, including her own. One particular letter caught her eye, a note from a young girl who had started a conservation club at her school. "Spirit taught me that even small things can make a big difference," the girl had written. Martha smiled, feeling the truth of those words deep in her heart. Martha smiled as her grandchildren huddled around her dining room table, their small fingers carefully turning the pages of her photo albums. 8-year-old Emma gasped at a picture of Spirit standing tall beside Martha, while 6-year-old Jack pointed excitedly at images of the African savanna. "Grandma, were you scared when you met the elephants?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "At first, sweetheart," Martha replied, running her hand over a photograph of the rescue team. "But sometimes the scariest moments lead to the most amazing adventures." She pulled out Robert's old leather journal, now worn from countless readings. The children listened intently as she described Spirit's rescue, the battle against the poachers, and the triumph of protecting the herd. Their faces lit up with each detail, especially when she talked about Spirit's bravery. "Can we help the elephants too?" Jack asked, clutching his stuffed elephant toy. "Yeah, Grandma. Could we visit Africa someday?" Emma chimed in. Martha felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched their enthusiasm. This was exactly what Robert would have wanted, their shared love for wildlife living on through future generations. She thought about how her journey had grown from a widow's promise into something much bigger. "There are many ways to help," Martha explained, pulling her grandchildren close. "We can support the rescue teams, spread awareness, and make sure people understand why these beautiful animals need our protection." As evening fell, Martha tucked her grandchildren into bed in the guest room. The walls were decorated with framed photos from her African adventure, and a small carved elephant sat on the nightstand, Sam's parting gift. "Grandma," Emma asked sleepily, "do you think Spirit remembers you?" Martha smiled, adjusting the blanket around her grandchildren. "I'm sure she does. Elephants never forget." Martha sat in her study, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow through the window. Letters and colorful drawings covered her desk, a rainbow of hope and inspiration from around the world. Her fingers traced the careful handwriting of a letter from Emma, a 12-year-old girl from Minnesota. "Dear Mrs. Walker," the letter read, "your book about Spirit changed my life. I used to be scared to try new things, but now when I'm nervous, I think about how brave Spirit was. I've decided I want to be a conservationist when I grow up. My mom says I'm too young to know what I want, but I know in my heart this is my path." Martha's eyes welled with tears as she set down the letter. She glanced at the wall of photos documenting her journey, from that first terrifying plane ride to Africa to the triumphant moments with the rescue team. The transformation still amazed her. She could hardly recognize the grieving widow who had boarded that plane, clutching Robert's journal like a lifeline. Her mind drifted to Spirit and the herd. In her heart, she could see them clearly. Spirit leading the younger elephants with the same gentle authority she'd shown during their final days together. Grace would be fully healed now, watching over them all with her quiet wisdom. The thought brought a smile to her face. Courage changes everything. Robert's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if he were standing beside her. She remembered him saying those words on their wedding day, and again when she doubted herself as a new mother. Now she understood their true meaning. Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward despite your fears. Martha picked up Spirit's photograph from her desk. The baby elephant's eyes seemed to sparkle with the same determination she'd shown that day when she led the herd to safety. Standing up, Martha walked to the wall where Robert's favorite photo hung, the two of them laughing on their front porch, his arm around her shoulders. She carefully hung Spirit's photo next to it, adjusting the frame until it sat perfectly level. "You were right, Robert," she whispered, touching both frames gently. "Courage changes everything." The sound of her grandchildren's laughter drifted up from downstairs, mingling with the voices of her children. Martha smiled, surrounded by the warmth of family and the legacy of love that had grown from her journey of courage. If you enjoyed the story of Martha, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.